Hi everybody and welcome to another Heel Heat Top 10. My name is George Coles. This is my tag team partner, Scotty Riggs.
Thanks, Buff Bagwell.
You're an American male.
Well, it's called Buff Bagwell. Gary Rhodes, everybody.
And the theme for our Top 10 this...
You're buff and you're full of Chipper Jones stuff.
Our Top 10 for this week theme was one that was mentioned by one of our fans or one of our friends on our last Top 10, so we decided we'll go ahead and do it. It's a Top 10 Most Shocking Heel Turns. And I'm going to go ahead and start it off, Gary.
You go ahead, son.
Number 10 was CM Punk turning heel once he won the Ring of Honor World Championship. Now, the premise was everybody in Ring of Honor already knew that CM Punk signed his WWE contract and he was leaving. The night he won the championship was supposed to be the last night he was there. He wins the belt as a face, grabs the belt, basically turns on the fans, rips into the fans, and does everything he can for the whole summer, which is now known as the Summer of Punk. Ring of Honor's even got a DVD you could buy of it called Summer of Punk. And basically the whole summer no one knew what match he was going to leave on, if he would ever drop the belt. He went as far as even at one point taking and actually signing his real WWE contract on top of the Ring of Honor belt.
What else can you say about Punk, man? The dude is revolutionary, and that was something that's never been done before or has been done since.
Yeah. It was a good leaving heel turn. It was one of the first real, shocking things to happen in Ring of Honor.
All right, well, we're going to from number 10 to number 9. One of the biggest heel turns in the business. Shawn Michaels turning on Marty Jannetty and kicking him and then throwing him through Brutus Beefcake's barbershop window.
Now, the only reason this one's so down low, because we do think it's one of the greatest heel turns in history, but it wasn't surprising because they built the turn, even so much so that it was in the WWF magazine at the time, which they show.
Is there a problem with the Rockers? I love that part.
Exactly. And the Rockers breaking up was hinted at for almost a year before they actually did. So that's why it's not up further on our list.
Yeah, and another thing is, if there wasn't no split up there, we wouldn't have had the greatest wrestler of all time, Shawn Michaels.
In your opinion?
Well, whatever. There's no one better than Shawn. Shawn, to me, it was cutting edge. There was nothing like that in WWF at that time, because is adult. Because back around then, it was still like the kid-friendly WWF atmosphere, and that really was something that was, I wouldn't say Attitude Era, but it was closer to Attitude Era than what they had for years to come.
Exactly. Now, speaking of another turn that made somebody's career, our number 8 turn is Larry Zbyszko turning on his mentor, Bruno Sammartino. Now, this happened in the 1970s. This is the catalyst that turned Larry Zbyszko into a viable main eventer. As a matter of fact, they had a match at a Shea Stadium where they were the main event and Hogan and Andre were the undercard. That's how big this was. It was one of the biggest feuds in Vince McMahon Sr.'s WWF before Vince bought it out, and it was one of the feuds that really had national recognition for, at that time, a Northeastern promotion.
Larry Zbyszko was one of those guys that I wasn't always 100% behind the character, but his promos were always on point. His in-ring ability was awesome. It just I didn't really buy into his gimmick until he turned on Bruno. And, if you've seen some of his work beforehand.
Yeah.
But that's my opinion on it. Number 7 is one of the biggest and probably most deadliest heel turns of all time. Sergeant Slaughter turning on the United States. turning heel, joining General Agnon and Colonel Mustafa.
Yeah, whatever they were calling Sheik.
Yeah.
But it was basically at the first Gulf War, Sergeant Slaughter decided he was going to be an Iraqi sympathizer and turn on the Americas, turn on the USA. It was such a good heel turn that they were getting bomb threats, they were getting threats on Slaughter's life.
They actually had to change the venue for WrestleMania 7.
Because it was going to be in the LA Coliseum, which is an outdoor event, but it was rumored that there was going to be a sniper somewhere in there ready to shoot Slaughter as soon as he came to the ring.
And the hall on fire with Slaughter then, you know?
I mean, it's a really great heel turn. It's one that's not talked about much because Vince caught a lot of shit for doing it, basically. But it's the classic foreign heel with a little bit of a twist. It's an American that's a sympathizer. Because as long as there have been America fighting other countries, the Nazis, we had the Fritz von Erichs of the world, the Russians, we had the Koloffs, I mean, the Iranians, we had the Sheik. Every country that's been at war with America, or at least, an enemy of America, has had some sort of wrestling representation. And Slaughter joining Iraq was it was insane.
Well, you got to look at it this way. Slaughter was a G.I. Joe character.
Yep.
He had his own action figure and everything with G.I. Joe. He was the most American wrestler at the one point.
Was he, Jack?
Exactly. He was not the All-American, but I mean, he was at one point obviously more of an American icon than Hulk Hogan, and then he turns heel. Exactly. Like I said, I was very impressed with that heel turn.
Now, our number 6 one, it might be the most shocking heel turn in the history of wrestling, but the reason it's down so low is because at the time, the organization it happened in wasn't one of the bigger 3. It was up there. It was a number 3. Tyler Fullington turning on his father, the Sandman, and joining Raven. I mean, who would have ever thought they would have brought an 8-year-old kid into the ring and he would turn on his dad? I mean, we've seen families turn, we've seen brothers turn on brothers, fathers turn on sons, all that crap. But this was an actual little kid in the ring in ECW Arena where no little kid should have ever been. Trust me, I've been there. The place was insane, and you have this little innocent looking kid turning on his father, and it was shocking. It was shocking to ECW fans who were hard to shock.
Well, the mastermind behind it was Raven, and Raven is just one of the, we sat and talked before how awesome Raven was, and to have him in the storyline with this, I mean, it was probably one of the biggest storylines in the 90s that I can remember from watching it, because I watched all of the brand, all 3 brands back then. Actually, the remainders that were still left around of the smaller territories, but I mainly watched the 3, and that storyline always kept me rooted.
Yeah, and it was one of the reasons why ECW got such of a cult following, because people would see stuff like this that you wouldn't see anywhere else.
Now we're going to talk about a big giant heel turn at number 5. Michael Hayes and the Freebirds turning on the Von Erichs.
Turning on Kerry.
Well, turning on Kerry specifically. Shutting the cage door on him. Well, it was actually Bam Bam shut the door on him, but...
Well, the premise was that Kerry Von Erich was wrestling Ric Flair for the NWA World Championship in a steel cage match, and Michael Hayes was the special guest referee. And at one point, Michael Hayes hits Ric Flair, and Kerry refuses to pin him. And as Kerry's going to walk out of the ring, basically say he's disgusted with the match, that's when Bam Bam hits him with the cage. The Freebirds come in and destroy Kerry.
You look at it this way, the Freebirds at that point were just about as big a babyface in that territory as the Von Erichs, and they turn on the prodigal sons of Texas.
Well, it came after the first feud, the first Freebirds Von Erich feuds, and then the Freebirds kind of went face, and then this was their returning heel and reigniting the feud with the Von Erichs, which is the biggest feud in the history of world-class wrestling, world-class championship wrestling.
One of the biggest feuds in wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of the biggest feuds of the 80s, and this was something that you watched. If you didn't know it was coming, you're like, holy shit.
Very impressive. And, Michael Hayes, what he lacked in in-ring talent which wasn't much.
He made up with charisma.
Charisma and the way he could talk, man, the way the guy could cut a promo, and he could berate all of Von Erichs on the microphone. He could just tear them into shreds if he wanted to, but he did it just enough to make them look good and him look like a heel.
Speaking of Michael Hayes and promos, our number 4 is a turn that had a guy that had his biggest part, or his coming out party, was in a Michael Hayes interview with a promo. Stone Cold Steve Austin turning on The Rock at the end of WrestleMania 17 and joining Vince McMahon. After years of Austin and McMahon being at odds with each other and having a great rivalry, one of the best rivalries in wrestling history, Austin joins forces with the bad guy. Now, I know Austin says he didn't like this portion of his career. He wasn't a fan of it. To me, I thought it was compelling because there wasn't much further you could go with face Austin.
And the thing I liked about it was when he was hurt and Angle was hurt, a little further down the road from WrestleMania 17, their little one-upsmanships for Vince's love was second to none. I mean, they were worthwhile. I could watch that shit all day.
Yeah.
But
it's kind of like what everybody's clamoring for right now with John Cena.
Mm-hmm.
It's Austin was in that position where he'd been such a face for so long that everybody wanted a heel turn, and they facilitated it. They made him turn heel.
And Austin was really behind it at first.
Yeah.
And he did great with it, I thought. Like you said, I mean, I think that was some of the most compelling television. When McMahon came down there, a lot of people thought The Rock was going to turn on Austin because The Rock was heel
at times.
At times too. And when they just kept hitting him with the chair, I loved it.
Exactly.
No one saw it coming.
Now, number 3 is probably one that people did see coming, but it was still shocking.
You're going to do mine?
Okay, I'll let you do it then.
Just fucking with you. Go ahead.
Our number 3 was the Four Horsemen turning on Sting. Now, to premise it, Sting was actually a part of the Horsemen for a little bit, and they were a face faction for the first time in their career. It was when all the guys came back to WCW from WWE, and they restarted the Horsemen with Ole, with Arn, with Flair, and Sting was the 4th guy.
Tully had some medical issues.
Yeah.
So Sting took Tully's spot.
So they started up as a face faction. Sting gains a shot at the world title, which at the time was being held by Flair. Everybody already knows that the Horseman's job is to keep Flair as the world champion. That's what the Horseman was built on. That's what Horseman always did. So Sting was reluctant to relinquish his title shot. The Horseman jumped Sting, beat him down. Basically, it leads to Sting winning his first world championship of many in his career and really putting him into that upper echelon of talent and putting him as the face of WCW.
He was their franchise, you know. But like you said before, the Horseman's job was always to make sure Flair had the belt. If you look at most of the stables since then, and you take Evolution, their job was to make sure Hunter had the belt. Legacy.
NWO.
Well, NWO, Hogan always had to have the belt. Legacy, Orton had to have the belt. You know, all these other factions.
Even now, Scum with Kevin Steen.
Well, all these factions, you know, got that idea from the Horsemen, a revolutionary group.
I agree.
Well, I'll go with this one. Number 2. One is set up for the biggest main event in WrestleMania history, Andre versus Hogan. When they went on Piper's Pit, and Andre ripped the shirt and the cross off of Hogan. Hey, you're bleeding. Hulk, you're bleeding.
It was one that no one expected because Andre had been a face his whole career. He was the gentle giant that everybody loved. And Andre, storyline-wise, Bobby the Brain Heenan got into his head and convinced him to go against his best friend, Hulk Hogan.
Now, this main event had to happen, though. I mean, it really legitimized Hogan as being the main event guy in the business, I think. Because...
Was he a movable force versus what was it?
It's a movable force meeting an unstoppable object or something. I don't know.
Unstoppable force versus the immovable object. That's why I messed it up.
You fucked me up on it, too. But anyways, I mean, like I said, this build up for the biggest main event in WrestleMania history.
Probably in wrestling history.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't your classic wrestling match, but it was a match that had to happen. Because if you're going to put Hogan as your face of your company, you have to have him beating Andre.
It's the match that made WrestleMania. Because up until that point, WrestleMania was just another show. It was the biggest show of the year, but it wasn't bigger than Starrcade. Starrcade, I would say, was bigger at that point.
We had Flair for the Gold.
Yeah, and at this point, this is what made WrestleMania the biggest wrestling show of the year by far. Bar none. And it was the biggest main event of the year. Now, speaking of going from big to go into some stuff that just missed our list, before we go on to number one, let's talk about the best of wrestling. Now, these are things that just barely missed the top 10. They're not in any particular order. We just, for whatever reason, they didn't quite make it. And I'll let you go ahead and start that one, Gary.
How about this one? Macho Man Randy Savage turning on Hulk Hogan.
When dissolving the Mega Powers.
Dissolving the Mega Powers.
It was a great thing. It had an underlying current that built to it, the jealousy with Macho over Elizabeth. It set up WrestleMania 5 main event. It was good. I really enjoyed it. Now, the next one was one that no one ever thought they would see. Bret Hart going heel and turning on the United States. Technically, he wasn't lying with what he said because a lot of it was his real opinions. He just turned it up a notch.
Well, at that point in America, our heroes became a Stone Cold Steve Austin.
Yes.
Someone that spoke their opinion, not being a Boy Scout. And Bret Hart had a habit of being the Boy Scout character. And it just became phased out. It wasn't time for your
passe.
Yeah, it's not time to say your prayers and take your vitamins anymore. It's time for you to drink beer and tell everybody to go fuck off.
Yep.
Next, is a recent, well, as of a couple of years, it's been going for a couple of years, Steen turning on El Generico.
Yeah, Kevin Steen and El Generico were Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions, and they were a great team in Ring of Honor. And after their last match as a team, everybody thought that Kevin Steen was going to retire from wrestling because he had come back from an injury and whatever. But he turns on Generico, kicks him in the nuggets, basically sets up a 2-year-long feud with him. And it was a great turn. It's probably one of the better ones that Ring of Honor's done, other than the CM Punk one, but it was great in its own right. Now, our next one is one that shocked everybody that was a wrestling fan in the mid-90s. Tatanka joining the $1 Million Corporation. Tatanka was the main guy that was fighting against the $1 Million Corporation, and he was a guy that I think that they were trying to build to be one of their main event guys, like one of their stars of the show.
Well, I like the way they did it. They built up for it because the whole time everybody was suspecting Luger of the one that's turning forces with and joining forces with DiBiase.
Because he's turned so many times.
Exactly. And it ends up being Tatanka.
Yep.
It was a good swerve.
Exactly. And Vince Russo didn't even write it. But anyway, that's the best of our wrestling. Now, if you guys like the order we have, if you think we put someone up too high, put someone down too low, missed something altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on our Facebook, hit us up on our Twitter, put it down where?
Down there.
Right down there in our comments. And
copyright.
How can you copyright something that DX has been doing?
I copyright everything.
Anyway.
I invented it.
You're like WCW. You ruin everything.
Ooh.
And I'll go ahead and let you get number one, Ruiner.
Ruiner? Biggest moment in wrestling, or biggest heel turn in wrestling history, has to go.
And the most shocking, because that's the list you are. Not biggest, most shocking.
Don't want to punch you in the dick. The most shocking heel turn in wrestling history. Are you happy?
Yes.
Hulk Hogan turning forces and joining the NWO and actually becoming their leader.
Is he coming to help them?
No. Okay. This here no one really saw coming except for Bobby Heenan.
And if he might be wearing red and yellow, but he's mosely yellow.
So they should have had some better writing for the commentators that
Hulk
night.
Hogan, you could go to hell.
Tony Schiavone, it just proves that during those moments that Tony Schiavone did not deserve to be an announcer. I don't care, you can send hate mail, you know where the down there is, But it's true. I've always not liked.
True.
That was damn true. Tony Schiavone is probably the worst announcer. That's why he went to work for Vince, and it didn't last too long.
He's worse than Pettingill?
I like Pettingill.
He's worse than Kevin Kelly?
I like Kevin Kelly.
He's worse than Mike Adamle.
Close. It's a close one. We'll get into that later. We should have a best the top 10 worst announcers of all time.
No, we
We'll actually make it top 5.
We don't want to do that.
No. Well, let's see. Anyways,
Hogan joining the NWO really turned channels. Basically, it had people switch from WWF Raw to WCW Nitro, and it was probably the biggest thing that ever happened in WCW. Not probably, definitely the biggest thing that ever happened.
Well, if you look at the ratings of the Monday Night Wars before this happened, they were back and forth. And they were going back and forth, back and forth. They'd win one, the other would win one. But this year, it was 84 weeks in a row. Not after this very moment, but after the NWO.
It was a catalyst.
Yeah, after the wheels started turning on the NWO, that set the standard for that long winning run.
I think it was absolutely the right time for Hogan to turn, probably even a couple of years too late. And it was absolutely the thing that they needed to make the NWO what it was, because every wrestling fan of our age grew up with Hulk Hogan as the ultimate good guy, and the guys of our age were becoming teenagers and young adults, and we wanted something different, and Hulk Hogan gave it to us.
You have to admit, I mean, be a fan of the guy or not, that was the biggest moment in history. Now, during that time, weren't you telling me that someone else was supposed to get that spot?
Well, originally the rumor is it was originally going to go to Bret Hart, which I think still would have worked because it's the same thing. It was before Bret was anti-America, so he hadn't turned heel yet either. But it would have worked the same in my opinion. I don't know if it would have been as big, but I think it still would have worked.
All right.
But basically, that's all I have. Anything you need to add?
That's it, my friend.
My name is George Coles.
I'm Gary Rhodes.
And this has been Heel Heat's Top 10 Most Shocking Heel Turns.